The 2015 Polyglot Gathering is brought to you by italki. Become fluent in any language.
So my name is Ulysses, met many of you. Today I'll be talking about the Sapir-Whorf-Hypothesis. Just to get an idea, who knows what I'm going to talk about? I mean, who understands? Okay, pretty much everyone. Well, okay, not everyone, but a lot of people. Okay, this makes me feel very... Right, great, okay. I'll be basically just talking to you, so. A little disclaimer, I'm not a linguist. I'm an armchair hobbyist. You know, I'm not even a real hobbyist. I'm just armchair hobbyist. And these are research a big way. It's just kind of a collection of things I've read and some reflections on top of that. And so to start right ahead, there. So what do you see? Right. Okay, so everybody knows this picture? Yeah? No? Sorry? Sorry, is there any comments? Oh, by the way, I would like to, unlike all the other talks, I would kind of invite people to interrupt me whenever they want. I'll try to keep the talk moving ahead. Sorry? Yeah, can you help me with that? Yeah. So anyway, this obviously is the picture that's been flying around the internet for quite a while, and the big debate between blue or black or white or gold. The interesting thing is that this debate never occurred in Papua New Guinea, because right? Well, maybe do you live in Papua New Guinea or? All right, okay. So, well, number one, because there's no internet there, and number two, because Papua New Guinea does not, many of the language families there do not have this many color terms. If any of you went to Gareth Popkin's talk yesterday, it's exactly what we're talking about here. So in several languages in Papua New Guinea, there are only two color terms, one for black or anything that's dark, and one for white and anything that's bright. So this is kind of the foundation of what's known as the Sapir-Whorf-Hypothesis. This is a linguistic theory that was introduced in about 1930s. And so who are Sapir and Worf? That's Sapir and that's Worf. This theory is actually a complete misnomer because, number one, this theory was not proposed by Sapir or Worf. Number two, Sapir and Worf never worked together to propose any kind of theory. And number three, Sapir actually largely disagree with the theory that's named after him. So the theory is actually proposed by this guy named Heuger, which is Worf's student. Just shows how much they listened back then. And so the foundation was basically, Worf was a kind of linguist ethnographer. He went to South America and to live with some tribes, and then, North America. And he discovered, while studying the language, he discovered that in different languages, there are dramatically different ways to describe the same things. So this is how English person would describe how to clean a gun barrel, for example. You clean something with kind of, instrumental preposition, and then with a ramrod, something like a stick to clean your gun barrel. But for Shawnee, they would conceive the exact same action with, a dry space, interior of a hole, and using some kind of instrument. So, and somehow he discovered through this kind of mechanism of translating the same motion into different concepts, language seems to influence how we view the world and how we react. So, yeah.
Could you better explain? I'm really lost.
Oh, sorry.
Maybe it's only me.
No problem. So basically, in Shawnee, is Brian here who can speak Shawnee, possibly? No? Okay. So I'm not going to embarrass myself with the pronunciation, but basically, this combination of words, these three parts, is what they use to call the action of cleaning a gun barrel. Whereas in English, clean with ramrod is what you would say. Does that make sense?
I don't know what is ramrod is.
Oh, ramrod is a rod. It's a stick with with a kind of piece of foam at the end, and you use it to clean a gun barrel. Do you know what a gun barrel is? Okay. Do you know a rifle? A rifle. The barrel of a rifle. Right? Yeah. Yeah. Voila. So, yeah. So, and while. All right. Okay. Yeah. What I would like to do today is to go through a few of these experiments that kind of revived this theory, because as I said, the theory was proposed in the 1930s, but it kind of fell out of fashion in throughout the 70s because of some other theories I'll talk about later. But since the past 10, 15 years, there's been a revival of this theory because of some experimental results that's been coming out. So number one, colors. So I'll start with the experiment. What I would like you to do is to stare at this cross in the middle, and I'll show you something like this. There'll be a circle of colors. They'll all be the same colors except for one. I'll do this very quickly, and your task is to identify the spot that's different, the one block that has a different color. Understands everybody? Yeah.
We have to fix the
Yeah. Look at the cross in the middle. Okay. So ready, go. Blue. So which one? Bottom right. Oh, sorry about that. Yeah. So yeah. If you said that one, you're right. The color is not great here actually. But this is actually fairly simple because I guess for most of you, this would be, a circle of green and a block of blue, right? Anyone disagrees? But let's try this again. Ready? Lower left? Same? Well, if you said the same as last one, you're either colorblind, which is fine. It's or you simply didn't see it. The reason this is interesting is in many different colors, in many different languages, there's the spectrum between green and blue is divided differently. So, for example, in Russian, for example, Russian, Mongolian, Japanese, and a few other languages, there are two names for the color blue. Again, the color here is not great, but then they would divide the two terms around here. There would be one name for a darker blue and one name for a lighter blue. Similarly, in Chinese, for example, there is a term that crosses between the B color and the C color, the qing, and depends on the context. It could mean more bluish or more greenish, but this is kind of a recurring thing across different languages. I'm not sure why exactly, and there are different theories about why blue and green in particular has this kind of characteristic more so than most other colors. There are some languages that have multiple color names for red as well, and several other colors. But green and blue is always kind of problematic when you translate across different languages. Interestingly, in Korean, there's also two terms for green. Anyone speaks Korean here? No? Wow. Not a single. You? Okay, one. So it's all attention on you. What's your name? Philip. So, okay, I'll do the next test just for you versus everybody else. Yeah. All right, but okay, now you have to think Korean, okay? Yeah, we can just will ourselves into whatever we want. So I'll do the same test again, and this time you, as well as everybody else, will try to look at this very quickly. Ready? Okay, go.
Top left.
Top left. Who didn't get it? Okay, did you get it, Philip? Yeah. Okay, cool. That's obviously because you speak Korean. Because the experimental result is that it's not that people can't identify different colors. It's just if your native language makes a terminological distinction between these different colors, your reaction time is much faster than a native speaker of a language who does not make this distinction. And they repeated this experiment on many different sets of people, and especially very interestingly in some parts of southwestern Africa, in Gabon or something, where there's a language Zuni who does not make distinction, who draws a line completely differently, and the people there have a very, very hard time telling these colors apart. So, oops, sorry. Yeah.
Which language,
Yeah.
sorry?
Sorry, Zuni.
Zuni.
Yeah. It's in Gabon, I think. It's a Bantu language, as I understand. So these are experimental results that came in around late 80s or 90s. But there are also some caveats to it, because there's trying to get my notes right. So it turns out, even if you grow up in one of these languages that have a very particular way of classifying language, you can be trained to identify colors very easily. So for example, someone from Papua New Guinea who only has 2 colors for black and white, they can be trained within a day to identify all the primary colors. Well, not all the major colors that we identify. And likewise, the linguistic barrier turns out to be actually not that strong. And also, by the way, who went to Gareth Popkins' talk yesterday about prisms? Or is it? Ah, great. So you would be familiar with this theory that he mentioned. It's by a theory proposed by Berlin and Kay. So these 2 linguists, they went around the world and kind of collected data and discovered that in every language, well, not in every language, but all the languages in the world, they seem to go through these 7 phases of development in terms of their color terminology. What this means is every language has at least a term for black and white, or something dark and something bright. And if there is only 2 terms, there would be these 2. If a language has 3 terms for colors, then that would be red. The third one would be red. If they have 4 terms, 4 words for language, 4 words for colors, the 4th word would be either green or yellow, and the next word would be the other, like green or yellow, whichever was not already used. And then there would be blue, and then there would be brown, and then purple, pink, orange, and gray. And then eventually they develop also 50 shades of that. So, but this is the theory that was proposed in the late 60s and early 70s, and it kind of, in a way, killed off the idea that the Sapir-Whorf-Hypothesis idea, the idea that language somehow influences the way you think. Because what this shows is there's some kind of universality in terms of how languages develop. We all go through this phase. I mean, the theory itself has been modified. The prevalent, the modern version of this theory no longer uses this set of colors, but the basic idea is still there. On the other hand, this is also kind of this has been criticized because these colors are kind of defined by us, defined by the researchers who identify these colors as real colors, as primary colors. And they do have a list of criteria of what constitutes a primary color. But there is some criticism of kind of linguistic egocentrism. And on top of that, in several languages, the words for colors are also used to describe other things. And sometimes it's hard to tell whether, like, for example, the words orange in English, it's hard to say whether the word developed as a color term or a fruit term. So there are some ambiguities this way. Okay, the next experiment, directions. So yeah.
It was criticized to be culturally driven or biased.
Right, biased, yeah.
But in a certain sense, black, white, and the 3 primary colors are natural or not cultural.
Right, except we don't actually identify colors based on the 3 primary colors. That's, as the example shows, yellow, for example, is not a primary color for it, in terms of our color cones. So the way language develop, it doesn't seem to be directly attributable to our genetics or to our physiognomy, for example.
I understand.
Yeah. Yes, please.
Thank you. I think it's interesting because if we think about it from a survival point of view, red is blood, so that would mean danger.
Exactly,
and then
yeah.
Green and yellow is when we started to distinguish between the different kinds of plants that we could eat, for example.
Yeah.
So if we think about it that way instead of our color theories, then it makes more sense, maybe.
Exactly, and blue occurs very, very rarely in nature. Well, relatively rarely, anyway. And well, I don't know why brown is so far down the list, but yeah. Anyway. So anyway, directions. This is left and right, right? Okay. Can everybody tell me which is left, which is right? Tell me which is right. Okay. Okay. All right. Yeah, for you guys. Okay, good. Just want to make sure. I think all of you got it right, I think. And but next, can you tell me where is south? A few people got it. Right? Good. Pretty good. Okay. There are some people pretty quick back there. Yeah, that's exactly right. This is actually calibrated for this room. So yeah. So this is indeed the south. If you're smart, you can just look at the sun, but we're not smart here, so. I think most of us here are speakers of European languages or Asian languages, I guess. There are a few languages that are very curious. A few Mayan languages, and a few Paman language, which is a language family in northern Australia, Aboriginal language. They don't have what's called egocentric direction terms. Egocentric meaning, left, right, front, and back. They use exclusively geocentric terms, north, south, east, and west. So for people like this, in order to say, oh, my left hand hurts, or something like that, or my right hand hurts, you have to say, oh, my north hand hurts. And if you turn around, it's no longer your north hand, So for speakers of the languages like this, it's actually absolutely crucial to be constantly aware of the cardinal directions. And of course, because of this, it's being found that people who speak these languages can readily identify the directions in even completely unknown environment. And you can always rely on them to find their way home. Yes? Do you have something to say? Okay, great. Yeah. Sorry? Yes, even at night. And yeah, it's being found somehow it's not, they don't seem to use any obvious external tools, but somehow they still manage to do that. So very curiously, there's also the reverse case. So in Mongolian, the words for the geocentric words are actually egocentric. So for example, the word for east is left, actually. And the word for forward is south, and right is west. I mean, kind of, I don't know, as a ethnic kind of Mongolian Chinese, it kind of explains a lot of historical conflicts. It's just go south. But there's some curiosities like this. On the other hand, yes, but it's also been found that it really doesn't matter which languages you speak, even if you speak one of these geocentric directional term languages, everybody's still better at egocentric like puzzles. For example, a maze. It's everybody is better at navigating something that's based on your own direction rather than some kind of external direction. So maybe there's some kind of universalism here at work on human physiology. Anyway, so agency. The idea of agency is who decides what, right? So there's been an experiment done with English native speakers versus Spanish native speakers. So in English, when you break a vase, you have to say, I broke the vase, he broke the vase, you broke the vase. Why'd you break the vase? And but in Spanish and some other languages like Japanese, you can actually say the vase broke itself, more or less. It's, how do you say it? Vase? Jarón se rompe. Yeah, se rompió, right? And yeah, in Japanese, なんか vase が壊れた. You don't need to indicate who the subject is. You don't need to indicate who the agent is. So they showed, yes?
The passive voice in English would still be good.
That's true. I think generally it's possible if you try to, but that wouldn't be the default kind of description that people use for this kind of things. So what the experiment that was conducted was they showed a video of someone breaking a vase or spilling a glass or breaking something, creating some kind of problem. And when they showed it to the English speakers and they asked the English speakers afterwards, what happened? You know, what happened and who did what? Most people would be able to tell, you know, who broke the vase. It was this guy, it was that woman. You know, it's for English speakers, it was fairly obvious. But for the Spanish speakers, they're much less likely to be able to identify who the culprit was. I mean, most people still can, but then, yes.
That's a cultural thing, though.
Right, that's, yeah.
When a child starts speaking, it's mummy, the vase broke.
Microphone.
Yeah. Oh,
Sorry. I think it's a cultural thing because, yes, in English we would usually point the finger. But when a child starts speaking, the child will say, Mummy, the vase broke. Mummy, my juice is spilt. Not, I broke the vase. I spilt my juice. And I think as adults, we change their way of thinking.
yeah, that's one potential explanation. But the interesting thing about that is this question was also raised in the original experimentation. So what they did later on is they got, it was somewhere in California, they got a group of bilingual speakers of Spanish and English, and they conducted the experiment in English, and they got the results of native English speakers, you know, people who were able to identify the culprit. And they conducted the exact same experiments with these bilingual speakers, I guess different group, in Spanish, and they got the results of the Spanish speaker. So I think with this kind of experiment, it's always hard to pin down whether this is, you know, cultural or non-cultural effect. But with the results of bilinguals, it seems to indicate that there's something beyond culture, you know, that created these results. Yes.
No, it's just your connection.
Who did it? So, bad dog. But, there's always a but. It's been found that if you do the same experiment while distracting the subject. So, but by distracting, it means, for example, if you're a bilingual speaker and I talk to you in Spanish, then your Spanish brain is somehow engaged. So if I'm talking to you in Spanish while you're watching the video, it seems like you'll be using your English brain. I mean, that's hypothesis anyway. And what they found is when, let's say, your Spanish brain is distracted and you're watching the video, then afterwards, even if I've asked you the question in Spanish, you would have like an English result, meaning that you'll be much more likely to find the culprit. So there seems to be some kind of, you know, it's not clear what's going on here, but there's some physical mechanism that dominates our thinking more than the language itself. So time. Right, so in the Western world, or, you know, for people who study math, most of us would indicate the time from left to right if we had to draw time, right? Which is, I don't know why people want to draw time, but people do. And this has something to do with how we write. English or most European languages is written from left to right. In Israel or Hebrew speakers, they're much more likely to indicate the time from right to left. Similarly, if you speak Chinese, Mandarin, you tend to write from top. I mean, the script is very often written top down. It's changing today, but time is also very often indicated from top down. So these are, sorry?
Also in mathematics?
No. Math is just math. I mean, not for human. So, and I'm not making friends here. But what's even more interesting is there are some languages that don't indicate, again, using egocentric terms, but they use geocentric terms. So in this language X, which I will tell you shortly, oops. So in Aboriginal Australian languages, there are some languages that it's also from the Paman family in North Australia. they indicate the time from east to west. So that means it changes on your own orientation. So where the time always flows from east to west, it kind of makes sense because if you think about the sun, right? But what's also very interesting is if you ask a speaker of this language to, for example, lay out, a number of books alphabetically, they would tend to order, put things from east to west. Doesn't matter what it is. It could be apple, it could be, books, or people, or whatever. This is how they conceive the world, always east to west. On the other hand, again, most people in Europe or in the Western world or Eurasia, we look at the future as something that's ahead of us, right? We look towards the future. But in Hopi, for example, American language, they look at the future as something that's ahead of us. And I read a little bit more about it. Actually, it seems to make a lot of sense because when you're walking, you can only see ahead of you, and you can see the past. You can never see the future. So for them, you're kind of always walking backwards because you can always look at the past.
So when you walk, you see where you will go.
For them, that's how we look at it because we seem to think that future is something you can see. But again, so in the Hopi culture, they don't assume that future is foreseeable, right? So it's like you're walking backward. You can only look at the past.
But do they naturally walk back for some?
No, I don't think so. But it's a figurative thing. Did you have something to say? Yeah. It's beautiful, but then potentially dangerous. But yeah. But on the other hand, the fact that this difference was one of the original data that was raised by Worf in indicating, okay, languages determine how we think. But the fact that you can actually explain this fairly easily, it wasn't such an obvious concept, but we managed, we could explain this concept, how time works backwards, how time goes from top to down, left to right, whatever. It seems to show that this is actually not so ingrained in language. If it's so readily translatable into another language. It may not be what we're used to think, but it's not so completely foreign that we cannot grasp the concept. So does this really show how language determines the way we think? I don't know. So this is why this is still open debate. Okay, so the next example, these are countries who speak mainly Germanic languages, actually all Germanic languages. And okay, the Germanic languages and their cousins. And, or they were. Yeah, okay, sorry. Okay. And they're good friends. So these countries have some of the highest saving rates, income saving rates in the world. And somebody might have seen this TED Talk. It's proposed fairly recently, about 2 years ago, by Eric Chen. And what he found was he was looking at this difference and he's trying to find out why that is. And he looked at many different data, and he found what correlates very, very nearly perfectly with the saving rates is what he calls futured versus non-futured, or strong future versus weak future language. What this means is there are certain languages that have a future tense in French, all Latin languages, for example. And there are other languages who have very weak indicator of future. In German, for example, there is future, but then you don't change the word itself. And what he proposes is that in languages with weak future indicator, you're forced to look at the future as something that's more present. So you have to do something about it. That's why you save. That's his explanation anyway. There are many objections being raised about this, but so far he's been able to defend the theory quite well, mainly because he really collected a lot of data, and especially for kind of cultural, social, economic differences. He specifically looked at Belgium and Nigeria, where there's a very high mixture of different language speakers living close proximities with very similar cultural background, socioeconomic status. And he found that even in Belgium, Dutch speakers or Flemish speakers are much more likely to save than French or Wallons. And similarly, in Nigeria, Igbo speakers are which is a future language, they're much less likely to save than Yoruba speakers. So, and he was able to demonstrate this, controlling a whole range of factors. And the effect is not just limited to saving. It also influenced a lot of things like how likely you're to smoke, and how likely you're to be obese, how likely you're to use condoms. Okay. I wonder if that has something to do with birth rates as well. Yeah. But there is another criticism. Yes? English has will, I mean, it's not that's why it's kind of low there. It's classified as a weak future language. Yeah.
But it was not included.
Sorry? Sorry? Where's Afrikaans? Right, yeah. Sorry, what was your...
I just feel like those two should be on the other side of the line, like Dutch.
Well, I mean, obviously this is very subjective. Yes. Right. That's why Finnish is fairly low down there.
Yeah, so
okay.
the distinction, because in English and German there's will, but in Finnish the only thing you could say is like I intend to.
Right.
So, and everything else is just using the present tense. So I think English is much more future oriented than that. So it just, if we're comparing in relation to each other.
Yeah, exactly. Similar with most Chinese languages, there's basically no future indicator. You simply say, tomorrow, eat or sleep or whatever. Clayton?
I think English might be above the line because we have will and shall is much more emphatic.
Right.
So it's leaning more towards the future.
Yeah. So, yes, Chris? Yeah, that's I agree. I mean, there is some kind of indicator. There is some kind of grammatical indicator. It's not as strong as the Romance languages, for example, but it's relative. Yes?
So is the hypothesis in this case only talking about grammatical structure? Because there's no semantic problem. It seems like all these languages are able to talk about it with ease just as much as the others.
Of course, precisely. He is talking about grammatical features. And this is why this contributes to the theory that it's something about the language itself changes how we think. It's not the fact that we can or cannot communicate certain ideas. Every language is able to say something happens in the future, unless maybe you're walking backwards. Yes?
Sorry to comment again,
Yes.
but I'm so excited about this because I've thought about it before.
Yeah.
And just like in Finland, if you don't focus on the present and do stuff now for the future, you will die. So if you look at that map, it's like the places that were cold. You have to plan for the future. And if you're lazy, then you won't survive. So I think it's interesting that this reflects in the languages. And I don't know, this was just my own thinking, but that's why I'm really nerdy excited.
Well, if that's the case, then that will actually argue against linguistic determinism. Because if it's a weather that's causing people to save, then it's not the language, right? So on the other hand, that's why you have to look at examples like Belgium and Nigeria, where within the same climate, within the same, environments, this effect is still visible. Yes, please.
Yeah, or it can be a confound so that the weather influences the language you speak, right? I mean, and I think actually the data is pretty mixed. If you saw this chart before, there's no clear, what is this? I mean, we have a wake at the left, and we are strong also at the left.
No, but it's always comparing to something similar, right? Which is, again, I mean, I keep harking on about Belgium and Nigeria. It's because there are more controllable factors, and I agree completely. I mean, I'm not a proponent of this theory. I'm just explaining how.
Does the data look clear really?
I've looked at some. I've only looked at data for Belgium and Yoruba, and it's pretty striking actually that how. So he controlled factors like marital status, age, education, and a whole range of things that I would say he kind of went above and beyond what's typically controlled in a sociological, statistical analysis. But again, I'm not a proponent of this theory. I'm just explaining how it's being proposed. But for me, I'm not fully convinced, but I think it's still open for debate. Yes.
What I also saw on the next chart is that the countries with a weak future language are Protestant dominated, and are Protestant dominated from the culture, and with a strong future are more Catholic or Orthodox dominated.
Right.
But except Malta.
Ah, right. Oh, I didn't even see Malta. But again, this was one of the factors that was controlled. Religion, education, all these kind of things. So this has been taken into consideration. And Belgium is obviously strongly Catholic dominated, and Yoruba probably Protestant. Not sure. Yeah. Sorry.
No, I said Holland is mixed. So.
Right. So it's German, right? But okay, the one very interesting critique about this theory is that somebody else also went through the data. I found that front-rounded vowel, the prevalence of front-rounded vowel is also a very, very good indicator of how likely you're to save. It corresponds to all the things he mentioned. So the critique is basically, okay, is this just kind of fishing for data, fishing for correlation? Maybe it is. We don't know. But maybe this can say something about how your accent is likely to influence your saving behavior. Numbers.
The problem is the correlation is not enough to show.
Yeah.
Correlation is not enough to show causality.
No,
that's
the
problem.
Right. The correlation is never good enough to show causality, right? I mean, this is a philosophical issue, basically. But then a lot of modern linguistic research is based on statistical analysis, and it is a very powerful tool to gain a lot of knowledge. And there's many research that could not have been possible without this kind of approach. So yeah, it's what you have to, what can you do about it, right? Anyway, numbers. I think many of you might have heard of this. The Pirahã language in South America, in Brazil, in Amazons, they have 3 words for numbers: 1, 2, and many. So I guess we're all many speakers, right? So many gods. And people who speak this language have a hard time learning arithmetics. It's I don't know, Benny's not here, and he can tell you some stories about teaching math, but you do not want to teach math to the Pirahãs because they don't seem to be able to grasp the concept of numbers beyond number 3. On the other hand, speakers of Chinese or Sinitic languages, most of these languages have only they have smaller syllabic words for numbers, and they tend to be very, very good at math. Stereotype, but it's true. I mean, not me, but it seems to work for some people. And there's been research done about, not just for Chinese, but any language that has more or less smaller syllabic words for numbers, they tend to be better performers at math. And there are different degrees of this, how different the numbers are, and also how clearly defined the numbers are. For example, French is notoriously atrocious with how they indicate language. French, not the other smarter French. So, but in Chinese, in Sinitic languages, the languages are very kind of decimal, very logical. 20 is 210, 30 is 310. This applies to a lesser extent to some Turkic language, which also have very clear and logical language system, but with a more complex naming scheme. For example, they have unique, Turkish has unique names for 20 and 30, and it's so does English actually. But this applies on the level of gradation. So on the other hand, what's also been found is, so going back to the Pirahãs, they have problem grasping the numbers larger than 3, but they are somehow very good at matching numbers and estimating the same. So for example, if you give them a basket of apples, which doesn't exist in the Amazons, but if you do give them a basket of apples, they'll be very good at coming up with more or less exactly the same amount of apples on their own. So somehow it's being demonstrated that they have the ability to estimate quantity. It's not that the linguistic handicap makes it so that they can't do this. On the other hand, they have a very hard time recalling quantity because it's being hypothesized that because they don't have the words to help them remember a number, so they can, even if they can come up with a number very accurately, they can't remember, and they can't kind of play with this conceptual abstract mathematics to use these numbers for calculations and whatnot. On the other hand, wait, sorry. There was something I was going to say, but I'll tell you next time. And okay, next there's this. I suppose most people have heard of this trope. You know, X has n words for Y. So the Eskimos have 3 million words for snow, for example. This is the most common saying. This is a saying that that seems to indicate. I mean, suggests that the underlying idea is language somehow is determined by the environment that you live in. So if you live in a very snowy environment, they have so many words for snow. This turns out to be not really true because first of all, there's no such thing as Eskimo as a language. Again, too bad Brian's not here, but he would be able to tell you. There's a whole number of languages within the Inuit Yupik family. So it's actually, this is a complete myth. It's impossible to count how many languages there are in Yupik or in Inuit. And also Inuit is what's called a polysynthetic agglutinative language. So it's also very, very hard to say what's a word and what's a different word because they can just stack things on top of another, and you can create an entire sentence using one word that says, a snow that's blown by the wind 3 days ago and fell down from a tree. Or something like that. I mean, is this one unique word, or is this just a variation of snow? And I actually did my little research I want to find out how many words there are for snow in English. And I found 33 on Wikipedia. And yeah, so it's really hard to say, huh? Melon snow. I have no idea what that means, but it's on Wikipedia, so it must be true. So does environment determine your language? Not sure. On the other hand, Sami, so Finnish or Norwegian speakers might know something about Sami. Apparently, by one estimation, they have something between 180 to 300 words for snow. I don't know how they live. In the snow, I suppose. On the other hand, there's the kind of the flip side theory that X has no words for Y. For example, any example people can think of? Yes.
Toes. One example is toes. What I found out that for instance, in Spanish, they just say dedo de la mano y dedo del pie, which for me was strange because in English and in Dutch we have fingers and tenen, fingers and toes. Yeah.
So something like this. There's also, I think, some of the more controversial talks would be, I've read some article by somewhere like, Russian has no words for accountability. Chinese has no words for, I don't know, freedom or something like that. This kind of things. That's obviously a false example. Yes.
In French, we have the very common expression bon courage, which probably every French speaker knows. I dare you find an equivalent in German. I have been living in Austria for 5 years. I'm still searching for that equivalent. So if you have it, please give it to me.
Well, I guess that's because as far as the French concerned, all Germans are cowards, right? So, sorry. I mean, there are many examples that's been bandied about in kind of movies or in mass media. This language has no words for that, so therefore they simply don't understand this concept. But the thing is actually, like you said, they don't have a word for toes maybe, but they do actually. There is a way to say toes. They're just different, And also, this is one example I found in Fiji. I actually confirmed this with my one friend from Fiji. Does anyone speak Fijian here? Yeah, I don't even know what it sounds like. But so in Fiji, apparently there's no word for pollutants. Therefore, the waters are especially clean. I don't know if that's true, but right. But there's actually no word for pollutant. So how do they call pollutants in Fijian? Any guess? Well, they call it pollutants, So because, this is how language word borrowing works, and we are always borrowing words from each other, and this is a natural process of language evolution. And just because we don't have a word for something now, we can steal it. It's nobody's guarding their languages. So people usually protect their language to not steal from other people. It's strange, if you think about it. Does it make sense? No? Okay.
Not necessarily.
Right, okay, no, it's like, okay, in all these language authorities, they're desperate not to borrow from other people, right? Whereas in every other field, it's like, please give us more, So only in language, people don't want to borrow. Sorry? Okay, so on the other hand, there's also we can also coin new terms all the time. And we are infinitely creative in coming up with new ideas. So since we're out of time, I'll skip ahead. Oh, we're almost there. So this is basically, there is a wide spectrum of the idea between linguistic determinism, the idea that language determines how you think, and linguistic universalism, which means we all think the same. Language is simply a means of expressing what we say, what we already have in our head. And I think this has been like a really dominant topic in linguistics for the past century nearly, and it's still ongoing. And I was hoping to have more time to discuss with all of you. What do you think? Where do you place yourself on this continuum? And how is this relevant to us as polyglots? Because there are actually there are many conlangs that were created with this idea in mind, whether consciously or not. Right, NLP, for example, it also plays with this idea. If there are any programmers here who use Ruby, it's designed with this in mind. And there's, obviously, 1984 is a very, very strong case of use of this theory in fiction. So, yes, questions? It's a weird end. Yeah.
So I think you missed one very widely believed instance of the Sapir-Whorf-Hypothesis, and that is about gender in language.
Exactly,
I think
Hebrew
this is
versus Finnish, especially, right? It's a matter of time.
No, even like if you look at in all or many European languages, there is the effort of the belief that the way we express gender also influences, reflects, or even can be changed the gender relations we have in the society.
Right, of course, yeah.
Yeah.
For example, this language Ladan is a conlang invented specifically with this in mind. It's a feminist language. Whether that actually has an effect of equalizing speech is debatable.
Right. But my question is but is there any data for this hypothesis? Is it true that languages with having less gender marks in their grammar, in their lexicon, are more gender equal?
Gender equal is very hard to measure, but there is experimental data that shows, for example, between Hebrew and Finnish. Hebrew is a very strongly gendered language. All the pronouns are gendered. Whereas Finnish is completely ungendered, right? So children who grew up speaking Finnish they tend to be much slower at identifying their own gender and the gender of others. Whereas Hebrew speakers, they're Hebrew babies, they're much faster at getting to this stage as well. So there is some indication about this. Whether that's what kind of sociological effect in terms of gender equality that has, I've never seen anything like that, and I'm not sure that can be measured. It would be very difficult. So
I think this has to be the last question. Yeah, it's not a question. I just wanted to add that in Sweden, it seems like there is a public belief on the relativist side of the spectrum, because there's a big public effort to drop the gender-specific third-person singular pronouns. Instead of like han, hun, they just try to use hen.
Yeah, so that's an experiment. So perhaps
try to change the thinking through the language. That's
right. Maybe 20 years later we can look at the data.
Yeah, what's gonna happen?
So yeah. Are we time or okay? Thank you.